December 1944. Europe was already bleeding from years of war, but no one expected what came next. Deep in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, snow fell thick and heavy, muffled by distant artillery. The cold was brutal, so cold that rifles froze, vehicles refused to start, and wounded men died not from bullets, but from the weather itself. It was here that the German army launched its final gamble. A massive surprise counteroffensive the world would later call the Battle of the Bulge. At the center of this storm stood a small Belgian town with a big name, Bastogne. Inside Bastogne were the men of the 101st Airborne Division. They were elite paratroopers, but they were exhausted, undersupplied, and surrounded. No winter gear, little ammunition, almost no food. German armor and infantry closed in from all sides, cutting off every road leading out of the town. The situation was so desperate that some commanders believed the division was already lost. In a distant headquarters, Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower studied the situation maps. Red arrows pressed inward, choking Bastogne like a tightening fist. Eisenhower understood the stakes immediately. If Bastogne fell, the German advance could split the Allied lines and possibly prolong the war for months, maybe longer. He turned to his commanders and asked a question that would change history. Who can move now? The room fell silent. Moving an army in winter was nearly impossible. Roads were clogged with snow. Fuel was scarce. Visibility was poor. Entire divisions struggled to move even a few miles. Then one name surfaced: George S. Patton. Patton was already advancing east with his Third Army, pushing toward Germany. Conventional wisdom said it would take weeks to turn an entire army north. Weeks the 101st did not have. But Patton was not conventional. Unknown to Eisenhower at that moment, Patton had already anticipated this crisis. Days earlier, he had quietly instructed his staff to prepare contingency plans, just in case the Germans struck somewhere unexpected. When Eisenhower asked Patton how long it would take him to relieve Bastogne, Patton didn't hesitate. 48 hours, he said. Some officers thought he was insane. Eisenhower didn't laugh. He stared at Patton, weighing risk against hope. The lives of thousands of airborne soldiers depended on whether Patton's confidence was arrogance or genius. Outside, in the snowbound ruins of Bastogne, the men of the 101st had no idea that their fate now rested on one bold promise and one unstoppable general. The room was silent after Patton spoke. 48 hours. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Some of the most experienced generals in the Allied command exchanged uneasy glances. Turning an entire army in the middle of winter, under enemy pressure, with frozen roads and uncertain intelligence, this was not just difficult. It bordered on impossible. General Dwight D. Eisenhower leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving Patton. "George," Eisenhower said calmly, "you really mean that?" Patton nodded, his jaw set. "Yes, sir. My troops are ready. I've already planned for this." That answer caught Eisenhower off guard. Patton had not waited for orders. He had anticipated the move before the crisis fully unfolded. In another man, that might have been seen as arrogance. In Patton, Eisenhower saw something else: preparation disguised as bravado. Still, the risk was enormous. If Patton failed, the Third Army could be stretched thin and vulnerable. Bastogne might fall anyway, and if that happened, the political and military consequences would be devastating. Eisenhower stood and walked toward the large situation map on the wall. He traced the German advance with his finger, then moved it toward Bastogne. "The 101st is surrounded," he said. "No resupply, no reinforcements. They are holding, but they cannot hold forever." He turned back to Patton. "If you move north, you expose your flank. You slow your advance into Germany." Patton didn't deny it. "Yes, sir. But if Bastogne falls, everything slows. This is the key." Eisenhower studied Patton for a long moment. Finally, he spoke the words that would unleash one of the most daring maneuvers of the war. "George, you go." The decision was made. Within hours, Patton's headquarters exploded into activity. Orders flew across frozen fields and darkened roads. Entire divisions pivoted north, tanks grinding through ice and snow. Trucks skidded, engines stalled. Men cursed the cold, but they moved. Patton rode among them, relentless, demanding speed. When officers complained about weather or road conditions, Patton snapped back. "The enemy is just as cold as we are. Now move." Meanwhile, inside Bastogne, the situation worsened. German commanders demanded the surrender of the American forces. A formal message was delivered under a white flag. The response from the 101st's acting commander, General Anthony McAuliffe, was just one word: nuts. That single word became a symbol of defiance, but defiance alone would not stop tanks. Artillery pounded the town, day and night. Medical supplies ran out. Wounded men lay in freezing cellars, wrapped in blankets and hope. Still, the paratroopers held every road, every intersection, every shattered building. Back at Allied headquarters, Eisenhower waited. Every hour mattered. He knew Patton's promise was bold, but now he had to trust it. The Supreme Commander of the Allied forces could do nothing more than wait and hope that Patton's gamble would succeed before Bastogne collapsed. And deep in his thoughts, Eisenhower wondered, if Patton arrives in time, what will history say about this moment? The snow never stopped. As Patton's Third Army surged north, the roads became rivers of ice. Tanks slid sideways. Trucks broke down. Soldiers marched with frostbitten hands and numb feet, pushing forward through whiteout conditions that swallowed entire columns from view. Every mile gained felt like a victory over nature itself. Patton refused to slow down. He drove his commanders mercilessly, demanding updates by the hour. When one officer warned that the weather made air support impossible, Patton cut him off. "Then we'll win without it." Few knew this, but Patton had done something unusual before the operation began. He had ordered a chaplain to write a special prayer for good weather, clear skies that would allow aircraft to fly. Patton believed in planning, discipline, and fate. As the Third Army advanced, German resistance stiffened. The enemy knew Bastogne mattered. Roadblocks appeared. Panzer units dug in along key highways. Artillery fire lit the frozen nights like sudden lightning. Patton's tanks responded with thunder. Village by village, crossroads by crossroads, the Third Army fought its way north. The fighting was close, brutal, and often confused. Men fired at shadows. Houses changed hands multiple times in a single day. Casualties mounted, but the momentum never stopped. Patton pushed his lead elements harder. "Bastogne must be relieved," he told them. "Nothing else matters." Inside the surrounded town, the 101st Airborne was nearing exhaustion. Ammunition was counted bullet by bullet. Medics reused bandages. Food was rationed down to scraps. Yet morale remained strangely high. The men had heard rumors. Patton was coming. No one knew if it was true, but the idea alone gave them strength. Every distant explosion made them wonder, is that Patton? On December 26th, after days of relentless advance, Patton's spearhead finally broke through German lines near the village of Eisenhower. American tanks smashed through enemy positions, their engines roaring like a promise kept. Shortly after noon, a tank from the 4th Armored Division rolled into Bastogne. The siege was broken. Men of the 101st emerged from foxholes and ruins, exhausted, filthy, and smiling. Some laughed, others cried. A few simply sat down in the snow, overwhelmed by relief. The impossible had been done. Word of the breakthrough raced back to Allied headquarters. When Eisenhower received the report, he allowed himself a rare moment of emotion. Bastogne was still in American hands. The line held. Patton had delivered. But Eisenhower knew this was more than a tactical victory. It was a turning point. A moment that proved the German offensive had failed. And now, Eisenhower prepared to speak words that would echo far beyond the war itself. Words about Patton, Bastogne, and the kind of leadership that saves armies when hope is nearly gone. Of PM, subparagraph, paragraph, 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 paragraph. When the message arrived, confirming that Bastogne had been relieved, Eisenhower read it twice. Then he quietly set it down. For days, the Supreme Allied Commander had carried the weight of Bastogne on his shoulders. Thousands of men, surrounded, freezing, and fighting against impossible odds, had depended on one decision, one risk. Now, against all expectations, that risk had paid off. Eisenhower exhaled. Those around him noticed something rare, a genuine smile. Patton did it, Eisenhower said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just with a calm certainty that carried enormous meaning. But Eisenhower's reaction went far beyond relief. He understood exactly what Patton's maneuver represented. Turning an entire army in winter, under enemy pressure, and breaking through in record time was not just bravery, it was operational genius. Soon after, Eisenhower sent a personal message to Patton. "Your bold thrust north has relieved Bastogne," it read. "This is one of the most brilliant operations of the war." Coming from Eisenhower, those words mattered. He was not a man given to exaggeration. Praise, when he offered it, was earned. Later, speaking to his staff, Eisenhower reflected on the moment that now seemed almost unreal. "When I asked Patton how long it would take," he said, "I thought he was being Patton, confident to the point of recklessness. But he wasn't guessing, he was ready." Eisenhower paused, then added something even more revealing. "That is the difference between luck and leadership." The statement captured everything Eisenhower believed about command. Great leaders did not wait for crises, they prepared for them. Patton had seen the storm coming before the clouds fully formed. Yet Eisenhower also knew the cost. Casualty lists were already growing longer. Men had died in the snow, so others could live. Victory never came without sacrifice. In private, Eisenhower admitted something few would hear at the time. "If Patton had failed," he said, "I would have been responsible." That admission revealed Eisenhower's own leadership. He did not hide behind subordinates. The decision to send Patton north had been his, and he accepted the risk fully. As news of Bastogne spread, morale across the Allied front soared. Soldiers spoke Patton's name with renewed respect. The 101st Airborne became legends overnight. But Eisenhower was careful not to turn the victory into myth alone. "Remember Bastogne," he told his commanders, "not as a miracle, but as proof of preparation, discipline, and courage." For Eisenhower, Patton's success was not about ego or glory. It was about what happens when command decisions meet determination on the ground. The Germans would never recover from this failure. And Eisenhower knew it. The tide had turned, for good. When the snow finally began to melt in the Ardennes, it revealed more than shattered trees and burned-out vehicles. It revealed the truth about the Battle of the Bulge, and about the men who refused to let it break them. Bastogne still stood. The German offensive, once so ambitious and dangerous, slowly collapsed under relentless Allied pressure. Fuel shortages crippled German tanks. Air power returned as the skies cleared. What had been Hitler's last great gamble became his final, irreversible failure. At Allied headquarters, Eisenhower looked beyond the maps now filled with retreating enemy lines. Bastogne had become more than a military success. It had become a symbol. Later, Eisenhower spoke openly about the moment that defined the battle. The stand at Bastogne, he said, was not just a defense, it was a statement that the Allied army would not break. But when asked about Patton, Eisenhower was direct and unambiguous. "He saved the 101st, Eisenhower said, and in doing so, he saved the momentum of the entire campaign." Those words carried weight. Eisenhower understood that wars are not won by heroes alone, but by coordination, by trust between commanders who see the battlefield differently, but fight for the same goal. Patton, for his part, never treated Bastogne as a miracle. "They were never surrounded," Patton said famously. "The enemy was." To Patton, the relief of Bastogne was proof of aggression, speed, and preparation. To Eisenhower, it was proof of something deeper: balanced leadership, knowing when to take risks and who to trust with them. The men of the 101st Airborne returned home as legends. Their stand at Bastogne would be taught in military academies for generations. Not because they were perfect, but because they endured. Cold, hunger, fear, isolation, and they held. Eisenhower never forgot that winter. Years later, reflecting on the war, he spoke quietly about leadership under pressure. "There are moments," he said, "when the fate of many rests on the judgment of a few. In those moments, hesitation is more dangerous than error." Bastogne was one of those moments. Patton's speed, the 101st's courage, Eisenhower's decision. Together, they changed the course of the war. And that is why Bastogne is remembered, not just as a battle, but as a lesson. A lesson that even in the darkest winter, surrounded by enemies and doubt, victory belongs to those who prepare, decide, and move when others would wait. Because history does not remember those who played it safe. It remembers those who saved an army by daring to act. Both. P, 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 and continuing a sentence.